And the reason that I stopped is because I was driving with him, and he had 2 bodyguards with him. We're driving around, and we stop at a guy's house, and he tells the guy, he's like, hey, come here. And so the guy comes up to the window, and he tells my dad, hey, what's going on? He's like, hey, you owe me some money. My dad says, if you don't give me the money, we're going to shoot you right here on the spot. Like,
So I'm so excited about this episode. We have Mark Hernandez. He's a youth pastor. He is an artist with some of his art in Dallas Gallery. He is a teacher of art, and he is just an incredible human being, a father, a husband. And on this episode, we talk about fatherhood. We hear his really powerful transformational journey and a journey of redemption. And we go into masculinity and really how art is affecting our culture. Overall, an incredible episode. Welcome, Mark, to the show.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Skylar. I appreciate you having me on. It's the first time I've been on a podcast, so it's new to me, and it's something that I'm kind of nervous about, but with anything new, I guess.
God will guide, man. He always does in these conversations, for sure. I'd love to hear your story tied into redemption. Like, you have a powerful story, and so give us a little bit of a background on that, and man, how did you come to know Christ?
Sure. So, the whole art thing really it's funny because it's tied into my story in the fact that it has so much to do with it. As a kid, I spent a lot of time just reminiscing and looking at what makes me who I am. And for the longest time, I was really ashamed of being Hispanic and being Mexican. That's what I am. I'm Mexican. But I was really ashamed, and here's why. My father was a young dad. He was just a young man. He had me when he was 16. My mom was 15. And so just like any 15, 16-year-old, he's an immature dad. He wasn't a very good dad. But growing up, he had to provide. He had to do something to make ends meet, I guess you would say. And so he started getting into the drug business, and he started dealing drugs, doing things like that. And for a while, I'm a kid. I don't know any better. I don't know what's going on. And he gets caught. And we're taken by CPS, and we lived with my grandmother for about 4 months. And then my dad gets out of jail. My mom was also taken, but CPS was like, you can't have your kids back because of the situation. And so we lived with my grandmother for a little bit. And then after that, my dad had to find something new to do. And so he started building business. And my dad was a very knowledgeable man, which when I think back on it, it strikes me as odd because he did a lot of very crooked things and very wrong things, but he was a very knowledgeable man. So he bought a semi-truck. We drove to Dallas, actually. He bought a broke-down semi-truck. He fixed it up, and then he started hauling grain and different crops across Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, the surrounding states. And so for a long time, we thought he was doing real good. Like, yeah, he's doing great. Good job for dad, But my dad wasn't a man that showed a lot of concern maybe for emotional support or supporting. The Latino culture is very cold when it comes to feelings.
Traditional, just traditional Hispanic culture. Like my stepmom's Hispanic, and she's her dad, I don't think ever said I love you, and very, very, very cold.
Yeah. And so that was my father in a nutshell. And what ended up happening is that we thought that he was on the straight and narrow. We're thinking, okay, cool, you're doing well. You've created a business for yourself. So, excuse me. So I get into high school, and everything's going fine, still very, it's still a time where I'm missing dad. I'm missing the warmth of a father. I'm missing the things that a father should provide for a son. So he calls me one day, and he's like, hey, son, I'm in trouble. And I'm like, what do you mean you're in trouble? Like, that don't make no sense. And he's like, well, I'm in jail. And I'm like, what? So little did we know, he was using his trucking business to haul, to do illegal things. And so he's hauling drugs across states, doing things like that. But again, my dad was a man of wisdom, like a man who was very knowledgeable. So he started with one truck, gets 2 trucks, gets 3 trucks, and then starts hiring out other men with their trucks. So at the time, he had like 12 trucks running for him. So we're thinking everything's fine, like everything's good, nothing to worry about. Then I get that call, and he's like, "Hey, I'm in trouble, tell your mom." Like, okay. So he goes to court, and they tell him what's going to happen, and he decides, I don't want to deal with the consequences. So he leaves, goes to Mexico, and he's there in Mexico for a while, and he takes the opportunity to groom his son, right? And he's molding me, and he's like, "Hey, listen, I'll pay you $300 if you drive 6 hours." So we lived in Friona, Texas. If you drive 6 hours from Friona to El Paso, cross the border into Juarez, and bring me some money. And I'm like, okay. Like, are you sure that's okay? He's like, yeah. Don't worry about it. You won't get in trouble for money. I'm like, all right. So once a month, I'd have a guy come to the house. He'd bring me a duffel bag full of 1s and 5s, 10s, because that's how people pay for drugs. And I would be sitting in the bathroom counting, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. And then I drive it to him once a month. And the crazy part for me is, you would think that I would know that was wrong, or that was a bad thing to do, but I had no compass for that. I was just following what my dad said. I was always doing what my dad told me. I never questioned him. I couldn't question him. And so I was doing these things and taking this money to him, and he was completely okay. He knew the consequence, that if I got caught, that something would happen to me, that if I saw that if the police pulled me over, or if I got pulled over at the border, that something bad would happen to me. He didn't care, clearly. And so I'm doing this for him for a while, and then I stopped all of a sudden. And the reason that I stopped is because I was driving with him, and he had 2 bodyguards with him. We're driving around, and we stop at a guy's house, and he tells the guy, he's like, "Hey, come here." And so the guy comes up to the window, and he tells my dad, "Hey, what's going on?" He's like, "Hey, you owe me some money." My dad says, "If you don't give me the money, we're going to shoot you right here on the spot." And his kids are playing in the yard. The guy has 4 kids. My dad has 4 kids. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I can't believe this is happening. Like, this is stuff that happens in the movies. This doesn't why is this happening to me? How is it happening to me now? And we're sitting there. And the guy's like, okay, I can get you the money. Just give me a minute. So the guy comes back, and he hands my dad the money, and we drive off. And then my dad turns around and hands it to me. And he says, "Here you go. This is for you." Skylar, he did that over $40. $40, right? And in that business, it's all about principle. It's not like, what's $40? But in my heart, I was thinking, what are you doing? Like, I could have given you that $40. I could have taken out of my wallet right then, because he had just paid me $300 to haul this money to him. And I could have given you the $40. You didn't have to do that to that guy. But at that moment, I told my dad, I said, "I'll never do this for you again." And he was sad, and he was like, "Well, you're my son. You need to listen." I was like, "I understand that, but I'm not doing this anymore." And the whole reason why is because while all that stuff was happening, I had one person, right? Another kid my age, who kept inviting me to church, and he kept introducing me to the Lord, and was like, "Hey, man, come to church. And I was a typical kid that was like, I don't want to go to church. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with church. My dad just left my family. Like, what am I going to do? Does God even really exist? But this kid kept inviting me. And finally, when my dad left, we had nothing, He left my mother with debt, like an insurmountable amount of debt. The IRS, he hadn't paid any taxes on his trucking business. And so the IRS came in, and they were like, "We're going to take your house. We're going to take your cars. If your kids were worth anything, we would take them."
That's the IRS.
Yeah. And so the whole idea was like, I got to stay back and help my mom. I'm going to work. But this family was like, you can't. You have to go to college. And I said, I don't know anything about college. No one in my family has graduated high school. Nobody in my family has even gone or thought about going to college. And here you are telling me that I'm going to go to college. And I'm like, but before you do that, think about what God's done for you. And I'm like, what has God done for me? My dad's gone. My family's in shambles. What do I have left? I have nothing else to look forward to. And so finally I give in. I'm reading the gospel. I'm going to these youth events, and I give my life to the Lord. So I was like 18 years old when I gave my life to God. And then we go back to that story with my dad. I'm 18 years old. I've given my life to the Lord, and I'm still driving money to my dad to Mexico. And then that event happens, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore, and I truly feel that was the Holy Spirit calling me and saying, with that discernment and saying, you need to stop. But it took something that crazy for me to not go in the same direction that my dad was going. Because could you imagine if I continued to take money to him, and then he's like, hey, and by the way, we put some extra stuff in the car. When you drive back, don't worry about it. And then I'm hauling other things, maybe drugs or whatever. But the case is that this family, they took me under their wing and they said, we want you to go to college. Okay. I said, I can't. I got to stay. I got to work. Got to help my mom. And they said, no, the church will take care of it. And the church did take care of it, bro. That church stepped up. They bought groceries. They paid bills. They babysat my bad brothers and sister. They did as much as they could to help my mom out. And the family, the Millers, they took me to college. And they bought me 3 pairs of clothes.
They paid for your college?
No.
Okay.
They took me to college because I didn't have a vehicle.
Got it.
So
I
went to Lubbock Christian University with their son.
Okay.
They drove us there, and I was like, my mom don't have any money for clothes or bed sheets or anything. And they said, we got you. So they bought my bed sheets. They bought me 3 pairs of clothes, and they were like, we did this for you. Now it's your turn. It's your turn. You got to turn this around, and you got to do the best that you can with what you have. And they said, we know it's not going to be easy, but understand, like, you're a Christian, lean on the Lord and not on your own understanding. And so I went to school. I went to college.
Wow. And you went to, man, that's such a profound story, right? And how did you feel? And how did you feel about your father once you were saved, right? And you realized kind of what was going down and just the seriousness of the entire situation. Like how did you manage your emotions around your father, your beliefs around your father?
I was a mess. I was a train wreck, if I'm being real honest. I didn't know how to handle it. I gave my life to the Lord. I gave my life to the Lord, but any young Christian can tell you that that's not easy. You can give your life to God, but what do you do next? Like, what are the next steps? What will lead you to become a better man? What will lead you to do all these things? I had no clue. I was lost. I was completely lost. I was completely lost to the point where I just didn't know what to do. I'm in school. I hate it. I'm at a private Christian school. So all the kids here have money. They're all doing things. They're all going out. They're all, and I can't. So what do? I'm not cut from the same cloth as these people. Most of them are Caucasian. I'm one of very few Mexicans. Maybe there was like 5 of us at that time. And I had nothing. And so I had a lot of resentment towards my dad at the very beginning. I'm like, what are we going to do? But it was my first year in college, and the cartel calls my family, and they said, hey, if you ever want to see, my dad's name was also Delfino. They said, if you ever want to see Delfino again, you need to pay us X amount of money or you'll never see him again. And then my dad called me personally and he said his goodbyes. And then after that, I didn't see him after that. And so I was a mixed bag of emotions. My mom's at home with my siblings. I don't know how she's going to make it, how she's going to survive. She's making $25,000 a year with 3 kids. I'm in college, don't like it, don't want to be there. So I'm a mixed bag of emotions there. And now I know that my dad's gone. Like, I know that he's dead. That's what the cartel does. And so I'm fighting all these emotions. I almost fail out of school because I'm failing all my classes. I can't keep up. It wasn't until one of the professors sat down with me and he said, hey, tell me about what's going on. And this man had nothing. He didn't have to do that, right? He's just a professor. He's doing a job. He's doing whatever. And I explained to him my story, and he's like, okay, well, let's write a letter to the dean's office and let's go through all that so that you can get reinstated so you don't get kicked out. And then he took me under his wing, and he would just coach me and talk to me and teach me. And he was like, and you need to go to therapy. And I said, I don't know if I need that. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, you're messed up. He said, you're a messed up kid. Like, you need something. He said, I know you're a believer. I know you love the Lord. But you need to go see somebody and talk about your emotions.
It's important. There's a lot of guys that have trauma. So a big part of what Rise Up Kings is we work with men across the board that have had great lives, but a lot of men have had some level of trauma. And that could be a father not saying, I love you. It could be a father being distant. It could be a mother not being there or not saying, I love you, not being emotionally connected. It could be, right, your father doing drugs with you and just this. It could be a numerous amount of things. So most men have some level of trauma. They don't like to use the word trauma, but it's trauma. And so what happens is when we become Christians, God doesn't remove all of the trauma and all of the neural pathways that have been built and the fear and the baggage and all of these things. And so it's part of our journey is we need to go and actually go do some work, right? So we need Jesus and he saves us, right? We're saved. We're going to heaven and we got some work to do now, right? So I love that you actually, I'm assuming you went to therapy.
I did.
Okay, great,
I did.
great.
I went to therapy for about 2-3 years. Okay. And at first I thought it was dumb because I'm like, I'm a macho guy. Like, I'm a Mexican male. What else do I need? I was raised to think that that emotions were unimportant. You don't show your emotion. You don't talk about your emotion. The greatest thing you can do as a man is sleep with a bunch of women, and that's what makes you a dude. That's what makes you the guy. And that wasn't the case, But it was so hard for me. And you asked the question, like, how did my father affect me? How did those things affect me? My father, honestly, I didn't learn a whole lot from my father. I didn't learn a whole lot about how to be a good dad, how to be a good husband, how to be a good partner, how to do all these things. My dad had a lot of knowledge, but he had very, very little wisdom, And the reason that I feel like that about him is I love him. Don't get me wrong. Like, if I could have my father here right now, I would. I would give almost anything to have my father with me. But the truth is, my father wasn't a Christian. He wasn't rooted in or have an understanding about who God was. The funny thing is my father would get in trouble, and then he would go to the Catholic Church and buy a saint. So he would buy this, like, Saint Anthony or Saint Judas is the one that he had all the time. He would buy this huge statue and bring it to the church and then have the priest bless it and then give it to the church. What's that going to do? That doesn't absolve you of your sins. That doesn't absolve you of anything. Does it make you feel good in your flesh as a man to do that? Maybe so, but that doesn't help you. So you're saying that you're going to continuously sin and then buy something for the church and God somehow is going to accept that? Like, the only thing God wants from you is your heart, right? And for you to submit and repent and believe. My dad didn't know that. And so here I am now as a grown adult male, and I'm messed up. I have this random professor telling me that this is what a good man looks like. Go to 2 Timothy, go to Titus, look at the descriptions of what good men look like. And I'm like, what even is that? How do I even perform that? That's impossible to me right now. And I'm looking at my dad, and I'm like, my dad wasn't a very good dad. His dad wasn't a very good dad, right? And so people want to look at generational curses and talk about like an evil witch is putting a curse on you, but that's not the case. The generational curse for my family is my grandfather didn't know the Lord. And so he lived his life in the flesh. And he lived it in such a way, like I said, never saw him complain. Super happy guy, but he loved to gamble. He loved to drink. He loved women. My father, the same thing. The generational curse continued with him. Same kind of guy. He loved to gamble, loved to drink, loved women, loved money. And then here I am, 3 generations down, and the generational curse would continue, right?
I'm proud of you, man, for stepping out in faith, right? Stepping out in faith and leaning into God and shifting the next generation, right, with your son and with your family and just the impact that that's had with you being now a youth pastor and guiding people and doing Christian art. I mean, that story is just quite incredible. I know there's a little bit more to it, but I just want to say I recognize you. I see you. That is it's powerful. I'm proud of you for making that decision to be different and to step into. And I think part of your realization was the way that you were going wasn't working, so it wasn't effective. And so you made the best decision, which was, you know what, I'm going to go follow Christ and I'm actually going to submit. And it may take years to submit and to learn how to submit.
And, one of the points that I want to make also is for all the men that are listening is you matter, right? Like your decisions matter to your children. The things that you do matter to them in such a way that it's more than just a physical thing. It's more than just providing for them physically, monetarily, emotionally. It's about providing for them spiritually. Because here's the thing, when we bow the knee to the Lord, there's hardly anything else that we need, right? When we bow the knee to the Lord, the valleys and the peaks, they're important, but they're much less about me and much more about what the Lord can do in those times. And so my dad didn't submit. My grandpa didn't submit. Finally, here I am, a broken man, trying to figure out how to do life. And I'm submitting to God in ways that I never thought I would. To the point where now as a young man, I'm working at a children's home. When I was in college, I'm leading them in Bible studies. I'm doing all these things. And I feel good about myself. I'm like, I'm on top of this Jesus game. Like, this is nice. I like it. It's good. And then I fall in love. And I fell in love with a woman. And we were dating for a while. We get engaged. And then she decides I'm not the one. And she breaks off the engagement. And I fall apart. So here I am, a strong Christian man, right? At least I think I am. I fall apart and I start drinking. I start partying. And I'm a Christian. I've given my life to the Lord. At least I thought I did. At least I knew what being a Christian was, what walking with Christ was. And now I find myself doing the complete opposite. Right? The prodigal son has gone off and is now living life like his father. And I partied a lot, and I just did everything that made my flesh feel good. And I finally, I met my wife, Michelle. Ironically, I lived in Lubbock. She lived here in Dallas, and we met at a concert in Austin. I wasn't living with God. She wasn't living with God. And we got together. I got her pregnant. And the day that I was leaving Lubbock, we threw a big party, and I got with my ex that night. And I was thinking, what's one night going to do? Nothing. I can sleep with her and never talk to her again. And so I do. 6 months later, she calls me and she's like, yeah, I'm 6 months pregnant. So, what do I do now? I have a daughter. I have a son. And they have different moms. They're 6 months apart. And I never understood what love was like. So I'm thinking that my idea of love is true love, right? I'm sleeping with these women. I'm doing these things. Until I told Michelle about my son, Michelle being my wife, right? And I said, hey, I lied to you. I've been gone. I told her that my grandmother was sick. Like, my grandmother's on her deathbed. I got to go see her. But really, my son was being born. And so I was gone for a week, and here I am lying to my wife. She wasn't my wife at the time, but we were living together. And I told her, hey, my grandmother's sick. I got to go. And she said, okay. A week later, I come back, and I'm like, hey, I have to confess to you, I have a son. That's why I've been gone. And if she were in her right mind, she would have kicked me out. She would have done whatever she could to get payback or whatever, whatever her flesh said, but she didn't. She didn't. She sat down with me and she said, okay, well, where do we go from here? And I said, I don't know. Ironically enough, one of her friends invited us to church that weekend. And I heard the message, and I was bawling, man. I was crying like a baby because the message was about the prodigal son. The message was about me. I'd seen God's greatness and his goodness and how he treated me so well in taking me away from that generational curse that my father was on. here I am. What am I doing with this gift? I've destroyed it. I've taken it and I've made something horrible out of it, right? I've destroyed not just my own self, my son's life, his mom's life, my wife's life. How do I put it together? And so I'm sitting there in this church pew crying like a baby thinking, how do I redeem this? And I just hear the Lord tugging on my heart saying, you can't. You're messed up. You're a fool. You got to give it over to me. And so in that pew, I rededicated my life to the Lord. And I said, I will never walk away from you. I will never walk away from you again. And from that moment on, we started going to church. My relationship with my son's mom was terrible. Like, we couldn't talk to each other without cussing each other out, without yelling at each other. Every conversation we got, every opportunity I had, I tried to make her feel bad. And it was hard, bro. It was so hard because it felt good to me to make her feel bad. Like, you ruined my life, I'm gonna ruin your life too. It wasn't until I felt the Lord calling me and saying, that's not the way, that's not the right thing to do. And when I surrendered myself to God, then I went back, I made my apologies, and I said, I'll never do that again. And from then, under the tutelage of Pastor Rick Wood at Pursue Christian Fellowship, which is where I attend now, it's been 12 years now, Skylar, that I've been serving God diligently, as well as I can, with every ounce of energy that I can. And he's been good enough to redeem that, right? What man meant for evil, God turned to good.
Yeah, I was just saying that we say a ruck, your mess becomes your message, right? So the mess that you've gone through eventually can become the message that God uses to reach other people, right? There's purpose in your pain, right? So God has a purpose for your pain, and you've stepped into that, right? And through your art, you're able to share. I can't wait to see what other type of art, right? What you create from your story, from your message, from your mess, right? That glorifies God in that process. And so there's just so much, man. That's such a powerful story and testimony of God waiting there, just waiting for you the whole time, right? For you to be obedient and lean in, and then you stepping into that. Yeah, it's neat, and it's cool that you brought your son. How old's your son?
He's 11. He just turned 11, and he hates it, by the way. Like, he and his sister look so much alike, and people always say, are they twins? And it was easy when they were little, because I'm like, I don't want to get into this messy story about, like, I'm not ashamed to tell it, but it's long. And so they're like, are y'all twins? And he's like, no, we're not. No, we're not. It's so much easier to be like, yeah, they are. Irish twins, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's cool being able to meet him. And his name was Abram, right?
Abram.
Yeah. Why did you decide to name him Abram?
So it was my father's middle name.
Okay.
And
okay.
So, yeah. And so again, here's the thing. Our fathers can lead us towards hell. They can lead us towards destruction. They can lead us in the path of unrighteousness, and we'll still love them. We'll still have those feelings of emotions of missing a dad and missing out on those things. Like I said, my dad was not a good dad. My dad would pick out my mother's clothing to the point where he would buy the clothes that she had to wear. My dad would, he was so strict. I was scared to ask my dad for $5. I was scared to do anything because, of how he was. And my family members, they only saw the good side of my dad, right? So like, oh, we love Uncle Fino. He was a great dude. He was a great guy. He was the life of the party. He was, but y'all didn't see him at home. Y'all didn't see how he was outside of these fun areas. But even after all that, I still love him, right? I still would love to sit down and show him, look at this family. Look at where I am. Look at what Christ could have done for you. I'd love to give him the gospel. I was able to minister to my grandfather before he died, and he gave his life to the Lord. And that was one of the best moments of my life because, in his old age, I never had the courage to ask him if he knew the Lord or if he knew anything about Jesus. And when I did, I said, would you like to give your life to God? And he said, yes. A few months later, he passes away. But it's incredible for me to be able to do that. But a father's mentorship is so important for a man.
And I feel like that's what's really missing in our culture is fathers that are actually mentoring their sons and guiding their sons. And where do you, as a youth pastor, right? You're seeing young young men. And so where are you seeing the gaps? Like where is our culture missing the mark with boys and with men?
I think one of the things that we're really missing the mark is the fact that people will always say, a strong man isn't XYZ, right? They look at a man and they're like, well, you don't have to go to the gym. Well, you don't have to be a macho. You don't have to do these things. So the culture is trying to feminize our men. They're trying to take men and say, you need to be weaker. You need to be weaker minded. You need to be physically weaker. You need to have these ideas that are more soft, which to some extent, yeah, like I would have loved for my dad to tell me he loved me. I would have loved for him to hug me and to embrace me and to do those things. And I'm not saying that those things make you weak, but what I am saying that don't give up the masculinity that God's giving you. Don't give up the fact that God has created you for a purpose, that God gave Adam a purpose that was separate from Eve's purpose, right? That those things should be separated. The way that a father leads his home, the way that a father leads his children is much different than the way a mother's going to lead. And we should respect that. As Christians especially, we should stand up for the righteousness that God has created so that we don't fall to the wayside and say, hey, I'm a weak dad. I'm just going to sit back and let things happen. I will not do that. I'll tell you that right now. Like, I'm raising my son as best as I can because I don't have him with me all the time. But I tell him all the time, I say, son, do not ever forsake the righteousness of God. Always stand up for what you know is good and right, regardless as to what the world tells you. Because the world has some crazy ideas when it comes to anything, gender, equality, anything, right? But what does the gospel say? Whatever the gospel says, that's what we have to hold true to and hold fast to. The rock of our salvation is Jesus Christ. And so if we stray away from that, that's whenever we begin to make mistakes. And that's what I tell my kids too. The kids that I teach in my youth group, it's like, I want you to be able to understand that this is true. These aren't just stories. This is history. The things in this Bible are historical events. Hold true to what you know. Hold true to what you read.
Yeah. I'm reading a book on biblical masculinity, and it's so interesting. On the cover of this is a piece of art, and how traditional art has depicted Jesus is always this soft male with these soft hands and his long hair and his kind of pale face. It shows the picture of this version of Jesus on the cover, but it's called biblical masculinity. And so it's interesting because that's the version that we've kind of grown up with and seen, when in reality, Jesus was the one, man, he brought aggressiveness. He used very cutting words to people, like when needed. So he was there to provide and to protect his followers, his disciples, the kingdom of God. Like he was there to protect what he was doing on this earth. And the people that were against the kingdom, the enemies of God, he had no problem going against them. And he showed them love at times when needed, right? And so it talks about having two voices, a voice for your sheep, a voice for the flock, right? To call the flock in, and also a voice for the predators, for the enemy, for the wolves, for the thieves. So we need to have two voices, right? One voice to call and to bring people in, another voice to cut and to be aggressive with when needed, right? And so I think as many Christians have kind of lost that, they've lost some of their backbone. They don't know how to take a stand in truth when needed, because love needs to always be combined with truth, right? So just love by itself without truth can be seen as overly accepting of everything, right? And overly tolerant of everything. But when you merge love and truth together, I heard it said that love is a river and truth are the walls that really keep everything together, right? And so love is that river, but we still need truth inside of that. And I think a big part of what we do and why I love your mindset around masculinity is, man, it takes courage to do hard things. It takes courage to follow Christ. It takes courage and boldness and power to be able to step into all that God has for us. And there's a lot of men that are struggling with a lack of clarity around who they're supposed to be. What does it mean to be a man? And where do they gain their power from? Man, they gain their power from Christ. They gain their power and boldness and courage from God scripturally. And so it's yeah.
And as men, we have to be able to understand that that's when we look at what truth is, when we look at what love is, there has to always be, what are we following to know what truth and love is, right? The Father showed love to us in what way? That he gave his only son, right? Here's the thing. People want to look at that and say, well, God loved you. He did. But what did God have to do to show you that love? He had to kill his son. He had to sacrifice his son. Something had to happen in order to show you that he loved you. He had to kill his son. As a man, what do I do in order to show my love for my family? A lot of times I have to subdue my flesh. A lot of times I have to put myself aside and say, this is what I have to do in order for my family, right? Whether we're struggling financially, what do I have to do in order to sacrifice, right? What in my life has to come out so that I can be able to provide for them? If they're suffering emotionally, what do I have to do? What do I have to cut out? What do I have to look at? What do I have to kill in order for God to be seen and shine through the situation? And that's so hard. That's one of the things that I struggle with the most as a growing Christian male. I didn't have that. You know, the only thing that I had was glimpses of people. One of the best men that I know, Kurt Miller, his son is the one that introduced me to Christ. I loved Kurt. You know, one of the best things is going on trips with him. And my dad was constantly yelling at us. Like it didn't matter. He was always like, do what I say because I said it. And Kurt would gently put his arm around my shoulders and be like, listen, you guys are being wild and I need you to stop, and here's why. In order to keep peace, right? And so I glean a lot from the memories that I have of him and say, oh, I remember how he used to treat his wife, which is way different than my dad. Like, he showed masculine love towards his wife in a way where I knew my dad was physical with my mother, like, you know, wanted that physical love, but Kurt showed, you know, the loving, warm embrace towards his wife, towards his sons, the way that he spoke to people, everything. And I always wondered, why is he like that? Why is he different than my dad? What is it? Like, they're both men, they both have families. And in my mind, Skylar, if I'm being real honest, Kurt is white. And so I thought, this is how white people are. And this is how and this is how Mexicans are, right? We're like two different animals. They look the same because they're both males, but a white man knows secrets that a brown man doesn't. But and Kurt did. He honestly did. The secret that Kurt knew was not a secret. It was that he was submitting himself to Christ. And that's what I was missing. So as a man now, even now, you know, I'm not perfect. I still struggle. I still go through, you know, through different things. But the submission of God, submitting myself to the Lord. And it's like I was saying before, I submitted myself in art, which is something that I'm going to be real honest with you. I never thought that my art was good enough to be seen in galleries. I never thought that any of that. But here's the thing. When I submitted that to the Lord, and the Lord said, you don't worry about it. This is me. I'm going to do this. You're not going to do this. Right? Just like David, everyone wants to say, be David. You can't be David. Why can't you be David? Because David was a man who submitted himself to the Lord. David didn't go out to Goliath and say, I'm going to slay you because I'm strong. David went up to Goliath and said, I'm going to slay you because I remember how my God gave me the victory over the lion, over the bear, how he gave me the victory over these people. And then one of my favorite things is that David is comparing Goliath to these animals, and he's saying, you're just like one of these animals, guy, and I'm not going to take you out on my own accord. It's God. God is stepping in for me. God is stepping in. You're making fun of the God of Israel. You're going to see his power today. And in that moment, God stepped in. Why? Because David stepped back. David said, I'm going to submit to you, and God used him. And God said, it's my hand that's taking this giant down, and I'm using you as the vessel. And I'm praying with every ounce that I have in me that God use me as his vessel to show my children what it means to be a good father, so that when my daughters grow up, they are looking for a husband and they see, hey, my dad was a good dude. I want somebody that's going to submit themselves to the Lord, and if this man doesn't, then I don't need to marry him. That when my son looks at me, that he can look at me in the eye and remember those times where he and his dad had those conversations on honoring the Lord. That when he looks back and thinks of, hey, how do I need to treat my wife? How do I need to do these things? That all he has to remember is, my dad submitted to God in everything that he did. And when he sees my failures, that he sees that I'm turning back to God for correction. Because that's difficult, man. Turning back and looking back at my dad, it's just so silly, and I laugh. I'm like, my dad really, like, he was in trouble with the law, and he took a statue to the church, right? He took a statue to the church to try to make recompense between him and God. That is dumb. But at the end of the day, it's just submitting to the Lord in all these things so that he can make your path right? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be given unto you. What are all these things? Whatever the Lord's had in store for you.
I mean, man, you have such an interesting life, and even some of the work that you're doing now is just very unique. You're the first artist that we've ever had on the podcast, so I'd love to dive into that. What is tell me a little bit about your art background, or not even your art background, but you have some specific pieces that are in a gallery out in Dallas, Lou's Gallery, I believe. And so what do you feel, let's give some background to art. What do you feel, like, why do you create art, and how do you feel it impacts our culture?
So, at the beginning, when all this got started, I never even wanted to display my art. I didn't want to exhibit. It wasn't something that I felt like was going to be beneficial. I just thought that, hey, the Lord's given me this ability to create, but it's for fun. It's nothing that I saw as great. It wasn't until I really started digging into the Word and understanding what the Lord was saying in preaching the gospel in all that we do. 2 Timothy 3:16 tells us that the scriptures are good for rebuking, for training, for teaching, for admonishing, and for equipping the believer in every good work. And so when I started thinking about that, I said, well, what am I doing with my gift? I have so many other gifts, but art is one of the things that was a passion to me, but it wasn't something that I wanted to share. And then I decided, what is it? Let me look into this. And why did God give me this passion? Why did God put this on my heart and in my mind? And why did he give me the hand to be able to create? And when I decided to look into that, it's when I really felt God calling me and saying, hey, you can use this to spread the gospel. You can use this to tell people about my glory, about who I am in a different way, right? Because we see art, and even now, like, I look at this beautiful made table, there's art on it, right? This Rise Up Kings emblem, the logo that someone created for you, an artist made that, and they made it for a reason. It's an icon. It's something that's going to tell people what Rise Up Kings represents. And so when I started thinking about that, I said, okay, well, my art can represent the Lord. How do I do that? What steps do I take? Where do I even begin? And so a big part of it for me was figuring out what God wants me to do. And it wasn't until I really submitted myself that I heard the Lord's voice telling me, do this, go ahead and do it. And I was skeptical at first, man, because I'm growing up, I wasn't really shown to go forth and discover and be bold and brave about things that come to me. But in this moment, I just felt the Lord saying, go after it. And so I challenged him, as the scriptures say, challenge the spirits, challenge God. And I did. And one of the things that I discovered was that I wasn't challenging him in a way where I was questioning him. I was challenging him in a way where I was saying, open this door and I'll step through it. Regardless of what it looks like, regardless of whether or not I'm scared or nervous or anxious, I'm going to step through this door if you provide the opportunity. And when I did that is when I began to create. And I challenged the Lord. I said, God, if you really want me to do this, show me that this is what you want me to do. Bless me in ways that I haven't seen so that I can feel comfortable in walking this path. In my personal time with God, he was giving me revelation of what I should do, what I should paint. And as I went forth, it was really just an organic emotion, an organic feel. And so I painted my first actual oil painting to submit to this gallery. And when I did that, it was accepted. And I went forth. I think there was 365 submissions, 75 accepted, and then 4 callbacks. And so when I had that callback at the bathhouse, I was able to share my work. And I was like, this is perfect. This is why God sent me for this moment right here, so that I could share the gospel. So everyone's super interested in Mark Hernandez, the Mexican artist. and I'm giving them a background about my culture, where I come from, and what this painting means. It was my grandmother. And so I'm explaining all of the things that are going on within the painting. Everyone's super interesting. And at the end, I say, but this wouldn't be possible without you understanding that Jesus Christ is salvation for all. And the blood that he has given for us is why I painted this, because it shows redemption. Like, my family's redemption lies in the blood of Christ. And in that moment is when I realized I can do this. Like, this is a possibility for me to be able to share the gospel in something as silly as making paintings, which is not silly to me anymore because I see the relevance and the importance of it. But at the time, it was something that was even trivial, you could say, because it wasn't something that I ever thought that I could use to share the gospel.
Yeah, powerful. And art really influences our culture, right? It's relevant to our culture. How do you, what's your experience with art kind of influencing? And you do specifically, we call it like Christian art, but you're doing art with an intent, with a purpose. And so what would you, how would you say, I'm really curious about this answer. How do you see art? And then as a Christian artist, how can we counteract the secular, right, space of art that's really kind of taken over? Because music is art also. Right. So how and why do we need more Christian artists to really step up?
Yeah, you know what we see now is, and unfortunately, there's a lot of secular art deals with debauchery and just the fleshly nature of man. Yeah. And so whatever it is that consumes you or that gets you to that place of saying, look at how great I am, look at how good I am as a person, or look at my struggles as a person, look at the things that I'm going through as a person. That's really what secular art is wanting us to see, right? They want us to see the nitty gritty. And so when you look at the secular world, there's a ton of that. But when you look at the art world, there's not a whole lot of Christian works. And the hard part about that is that there's not a whole lot of people advocating for Christian works, because they think back and they think about the Renaissance, right? And you think about the iconography of the Renaissance, and you're thinking about paintings of Christ, paintings of the disciples, paintings of Jesus lying down, paintings of Mary holding Jesus or baby Jesus or whatever. And the connotation, I feel like, with Christian art is that a lot of Christians in different religions like Catholicism, things like that, they use that iconography and they worship it. And they use that iconography and they say, hey, this is Christian art for the sake of seeing Jesus's face. But that's not what Christian art is, right? Christian art is important because I have a story. As a man, Christ has brought me through the hardships. I've gone through the valleys and to the peaks because of Christ. And if I can share that with you in a way that's relevant to you, then that's why Christian art is important, right? In the same way that secular art says, look at my failures, look at how hard my life has been, look at the plight of the Mexican man or the Mexican person. That's really popular right now, right? It's like everybody wants to know about other cultures. Everybody wants to look at a Christian man's life and say, ooh, look at how difficult it is for them. So let's paint something that shows the difficulty that these Mexican people are having. Where for me, one of the paintings that I brought to share with you guys today is a picture of my grandfather. And I love that painting. And it does talk about my culture, but it talks more about who God is, in a sense that my grandfather he came over from Mexico when he was young in his teens, and he started working the fields, and he worked them all his life. And what secular culture wants us to believe in is they want us to look at, my grandfather's name was Delfino. They want us to look at Delfino and say, look at this poor man. Look at how much he's struggling, and America is taking from him, and they don't care. He's just a worker. They see him as a nobody. But here's the thing. My grandfather, Skylar, not one time did he ever complain about his work. Not one time did I ever see my grandfather come home from his work and say, I hate this land. I hate doing this. I hate my job. That wasn't the case. The case was that my grandfather was so happy about doing what he did. The struggle that he went through was real for him, but it wasn't something that was overbearing. So seeing my grandfather as a man, and he wasn't a Christian, but seeing a grandfather who was happy about doing what he was doing. You know, when God tells Adam that he's going to toil and fight against the thorns and thistles because he sinned, Adam takes on that responsibility. Does he complain? Bible doesn't tell us that. It tells us that he toiled. And that's what my grandfather did. So for me to be able to share that with people and say, my grandfather toiled against the thorns and thistles all of his life. But guess what? He loved it. Guess what? He didn't give up. Guess what? He didn't show me. I never once saw my grandfather feel sorry for himself. I never once saw my grandfather look at his life and say, man, I hate this. And that showed me so much. So as a Christian artist, I want to be able to share that. Look, there's other aspects of my people. There's other aspects of these men and women who have come before me. And that needs to be shared, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of the art and just our culture in general is a more victimized culture, right? And so I'm curious where that art really shifted, right, to represent the people that are being taken advantage of or victims of a society or of a culture and the mindset that comes with that. Because even though I'm sure there were some legitimate challenges with your grandfather, right? Real things that he went through that were very hard and even could be seen as a victim in times. His mindset didn't have a victim mentality where everyone's out to get him and he's at the bottom and everything is terrible, right? It was someone that maybe had some gratitude, right? For where he was and where he's risen to. And a lot of that's perspective, right? Perspective drives performance. So what a person thinks about himself, his behaviors will match that. And so what a person thinks about the world, right? His behaviors will match that. And so perspective really drives performance. And so I'm curious, right? Your grandfather's overarching worldview, his perspective on life, was it? Yeah. And so art, right? Plays it. I'm thinking of some images, right? Of some people that had been hurt over this last 5 years, victimized, you would say, and the art depicts them in a it's created a lot of a victim mentality in our society. And so I love the spin, the angle, not the spin, but the angle that you have with your art is really showing you don't need to paint baby Jesus to do Christian art. You can paint a beautiful picture of a grandfather, and it can show the redemptive, right? God's redeeming love for all humans. Man, Mark, it's been a pleasure, man. You have a story to tell. Like, I cannot wait to see what God does with the art that you have, with your heart for men, your heart for your family, your heart for culture and community. And so I'm very excited, dude. You are a very articulate, powerful dude, and it's been fun being able to hear your story, and hopefully it's inspiring to the guys listening to this podcast, right? For them to, if they've had a past, to use that as their message and to continue to lean into God, right? To surrender, to be obedient, to take a risk also. If there's something that's on men's hearts that are listening to this where they haven't stepped into it yet, in this new year, right? That they choose to take a risk if they feel called to go do this. And as you mentioned, challenge God, like challenge him to, hey, Lord, I'm going to go take a risk. I'm going to step out. Will you open this door? So much wisdom, dude, and your and everything that was said. It's been
God,
fun.
Man. Praise God. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, Mark. So we have a special surprise for you. You down for surprises?
Yeah, I like surprises, man. Who doesn't?
Okay, there we go. So we got a suitcase, a little briefcase type deal. We have two of them. One of them has $100 cash and $1 bills. And the other one has a pair of nail boards that we're going to have you stand on if you pick that one. So, and one is $100 and the other is some nail boards. And then we got some gifts for you in the middle, but you get to pick, my friend, one of those, and you whichever one you pick, you're either doing or you're keeping. So you get to keep the nail boards also if you end up picking that one. Which one you going for?
You know what? I'm right-handed. Trying to be at the right hand of God. So let's go with the.
There we
right
go.
one.
I have no clue what's in what. Let's see what you got.
Hey, money! Let's go.
There we go. Have you ever stood on nail boards?
I have not.
Okay,
I'd still like the experience if you're still offering.
Yeah, if you want to do, we can do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's do it.
I still get to keep the 100.
You get to keep the 100.
All right, let's go.
It's very painful, man. It's excruciating, but it's powerful. You get to lean into God in this moment.
One of my superpowers is suffering well. So
Okay,
let's do it.
Here we go. All right, let's do this.
All right, guys. Hey, this is Mark Hernandez. I'm about to step on some nail boards. I'm trying to beat the record. They won't tell me what it is, but we're going for it. All in or go home. So let's do it.
Use that step on first, and then I'll remove the chair. We like to inflict a little bit of pain. Pain is the path.
Oh my gosh.
There we go, baby. How's it feel?
I need to balance my weight.
Yeah. No, stay on it. Stay on it. You gotta stay on it. No, you're good. You can. God, man, lean into God. He's got you. He's got you in this moment. He's got you in this moment. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Whoa! There we go, man. Painful, right?
Oh, yeah. That's incredible. Show like the bottom of your foot. Let's see. Oh, yeah. There it is.
There we go. What is that? It was horrible.
I don't know. It was
horrible.
It was horrible. I should have listened before.
That's great. Good stuff, though. Love these things.